tape her hands back up again. We'll sit her down on the van, leave her there. And I start listening for a heartbeat, but all I can hear is my heartbeat. It's just pounding, pounding. With Gina, dude, I love her. It's written on 24th Street Bridge. I love her, so I feel her.
Hey, Jeremiah. Feeling all right?
No.
What's wrong?
My leg.
You from running, so.
No, that's not from running.
Okay, what happened?
It's from dumping her body in Fremont. That's what it's from. Mr. I daily record everything. Gina Wilcox is Jeanna, dude.
How do you know her?
She's in Fremont. That's how I know her.
Is she in danger?
Can't help her no more.
The detectives, you almost hear their own shock in the interview. They're sitting down ready to investigate an auto theft, and he's just taken it to a place of harm to another human being and potentially murder. It's unbelievable to most of us that someone would come into a room, sit down, and just say, I dumped a body.
Nobody knows she's missing?
That's the part. They don't even know she's gone. Monday morning, Sunday night.
What do you mean by gone?
Like I ain't never getting out of here. And I just want to stop. I don't know.
Well, wait a minute. I gotta know if she's safe.
Connolly doesn't elaborate right away. And sometimes we call this the teasing effect that you'll see in people with psychopathy. They dangle some information, which we think is designed to get then a response from the viewer, sort of stun them. And we think that they derive some satisfaction from that.
Bunch of stuff, Columbus. That's right, fruit.
Oh, that's what you said. Why'd you throw her stuff in the alley?
Why'd I burn the van up the other day?
I don't know. I like thinking about a van. Tell me about that.
My 87 G20 van?
Yeah?
It had her in it. It had her in it. Had her in it.
What do you mean had her? You gave her a ride?
3 or 4 hours. Gave her a ride to Fremont. Dumped her in the ditch. I don't really care about that girl, dude.
Is she alive?
No, she's not.
He acknowledges that nobody even knew that this victim was missing, but then they know about it now because he's starting to disclose it, but also because after killing her, he stole a car and was driving erratically. So there's definitely some impulsivity, which is a feature that we see in psychopathy.
Tell me about Gina.
She's in Fremont, dude. She's laying there in the road.
No,
Ain't
to get to
covered.
Fremont?
She's not covered up.
What's she wearing?
Duct tape.
That's it?
Yeah, I
Is she
remember.
naked?
That's the part that scared her, dude. To keep her from running. I got her naked. I told her I'm giving her step by step, like I'm some kind of weird teacher or prison coach. I was completely calm, completely cool. I said, this is to keep you running down the street, you know, to keep you thinking twice about running out of here.
He describes himself like a teacher or a coach, which is like he's putting himself on a pedestal, like he's better than the victim. This is another element of that grandiosity, including even his comfort with calling the investigators dude. I think it takes a certain level of grandiosity to be able to do that in a situation like this, and is describing this in a way as if he's talking about something other than a kidnapping, a rape, and a murder.
That night in the laundromat, we were supposed to get high. And she's supposed to move in. I don't care.
She's your girlfriend?
I wasn't giving up the world for that girl, dude. thought that she was not on my level. She thought my level was higher than hers, that I was too much of a prize for her, and I thought the same thing of her. Yeah, she just wouldn't listen, man.
Oh, you think?
She wouldn't listen. She wanted to move back in with her roommate.
Okay.
But she, well, I'm going back. I never said I'd move in with you, you know. I never finalized it. I was, that laundromat.
For Connolly, for her to say, I don't want to move in with you, this isn't a relationship, or this isn't as serious as you think it is, likely was a massive rejection for him, and it challenged the fantasy that he had going in his head, that fixed delusion. And that may have been where there was an eruption of anger.
I changed it all her. I grabbed duct tape, the biggest roll, black duct tape, backpack, so stupid kidnapper kid. Not necessarily rape kid. Got in the van, or drove over there, parked right in front of me, and snuck down to the laundromat on foot. I didn't want to be seen. I see her.
Is she in the laundromat?
Yeah, she was still there. I remember sitting across the street behind a tree, waiting, want to save her, you know. I mean, that's kind of what I'm thinking when I ended her life. Just sneak right up behind her. Wanted to see how close I could get. I got a duct tape. I stand there and talk to her for a little while. Finally, I get done talking to her, and she puts her hand out like this. And I grab her hand, and I'm up immediately aggressive. I'm juggling it, holding it. I say, get up, come on, let's go. And I get really, really primal. Really, you know, I'm like, get up, let's go. She's screaming and hollering. I'm looking around to see if anybody can hear it. Wrestled to the ground, got on top of her, tied her hands up with duct tape. Kept telling her, I tried to help you. You still wouldn't listen. You just didn't try.
He talks about how he wasn't aggressive at first, but then he goes primal. This speaks to his grandiosity and narcissism. He wants the power of being able to get as close to her as possible while he's sneaking up on her. And then ultimately, you know, confronting her.
He tried. I had the front or back, and her feet. Flipped her over. I keep, you know, threatening her and verbally aggressive, more teasing her so she knows, you know. Pick her up, throw her on my shoulder, put her in the van.
He refers to teasing her, and it is sadistic. He knows that she's frightened. So we get these three different elements as he's describing his rage, his control, and manipulation of her, as he's already made up his mind that he's going to kill her.
What was she saying? Just like, you know, you're gonna drop me off, right? I said, yeah, I'll drop you off eventually. I'm just lying to her. Just lying to her. And you'll be lucky if you go home tonight. And she's like, you know, she starts up here and there, and she starts talking again. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Duct tape falls off. And I had given her a warning about that. And I said, you know, I said, did that tape just come off of your face? You know, and she said, no. You know, basically to maintain control of the situation, to stay as calm, as collective as I was just eerily calm. I'd love to be that calm all day long. If I could have grown up that calm and been raised that calm and that collected, I think my life would have been a lot better.
Here, Connolly saying to us is, I was calm, I was cool. My guess is he had fantasized for a while about being sadistic and coercive. And now that it was playing out, it was acting as a release for him. There was a buildup, and that's where he talks about he was calm and he was cool.
There is a bit of glibness and superficial charm that he's emanating, even though he may not seem charming. He has this superficiality to him, as if he's almost trying to get them engaged in the conversation, to lure them in with his details and the way he's describing what happened.
I got her naked, but she got scared I was gonna rape her. And I'm like, dude, I'm not gonna rape you, dude. It's gonna keep you from running. Got her laid on the bed, and she kept looking back.
Bed in your truck or
There's
your
a
van?
conversion van folded a bed seat and a bed.
Okay.
And I started to undo my belt. I started to undo my pants. She noticed. She's like, no, 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 no. And she clenched real tight. She's like, no, no, no. You said you weren't going to do that. She's not trying to fight it. She's not squirming. She's sitting there. I didn't, like, rape her as in she's screaming. Like you see the episode of Law & Order SVU. She's not screaming. She's not fighting.
Connolly likely had some rape fantasies, and those somehow intersected with his fantasy or belief that he was in this relationship with the victim. He loves her, they're gonna live their lives together, but to harm her sexually challenges that reality, and that is where we see him dial back from that. And he's going out of his way to minimize the rape and sexual assault component of this.
I set her up. She's not crying, really. She's just looking at me, you know. And I told her something like that. I told her it wouldn't hurt you, you know. We're kind of sitting there. And I wait for about 30 seconds, 30, 45 seconds. I grab the fresh rolled duct tape up front. I slap it over her nose real quick, you know, as quick as I can. I said, I want to tell you a little story. When I grew up, I almost drowned. It was the best way to go. If you're ever going to die, die of suffocation. As I made her a duct tape mask, that's what I was telling her.
What was your intention of doing that?
The quickest way possible. The most humane way. I told her, I said, dude, I got 100 different things in that Foot Locker back there, in the back of that van. 100 different tools I could use that are way more painful. You just understand that somebody gave a about it.
Be suffocated or be scared about it.
That doesn't make sense.
Connolly talks about how he duct taped her face as if it was a humane act, and how that is a quick way to die, which is ironic because it really isn't. It's an incredibly tormented way for a human being to struggle and be harmed. And the fact that he duct taped her face makes me wonder if that was his attempt to distance himself and dehumanize her. So he didn't have to look at her eyes, he didn't have to look at her face, he didn't have to look at this woman that he had this romantic fantasy going.
I used my right hand and I choked her out. And I'm holding this on top of the duct tape, and you can tell her nose is pinched down as far as it can go. It's got to be a little bit, you know, but it's going to be quick. She fights and fights and fights. And finally, with my hand on her throat and the tape, it's just, she stops fighting him.
Connolly appears to be sniffing, sniveling, crying. The display of emotions seems very shallow or very out of proportion to the gravity of the situation. If someone came in to admit that they had murdered the love of their life and that they were remorseful about it, we'd expect to see more than this steady state of sniffing going through where he's sniveling and wiping his nose. But it's very superficial, very shallow.
So I tape her hands back up again. We'll sit her down on the van, lay her there, and I start listening for a heartbeat, listening for air. But all I can hear is my heartbeat. Every time I leaned up against her chest, all I could hear was mine. My mind just pounding away. The calmness was gone. It was, the adrenaline was back. The calmness is over. Like a storm or something, you know, where it calms down at the end. But inside, this adrenaline's just pounding, pounding.
He talks about the adrenaline rush. He can hear his own heartbeat. This is really, it's really in that lane of what we call a very sadistic thrill form of killing. It's quite arousing to him.
With Gina, dude, I love her, dude. It's written on 24th Street Bridge. I love her, so I killed her. go through a neighborhood quick as I can because I'm drinking. And I'm thinking, well, it's just a dead body next to me. She's a corpse now. She's dead. She's laying on the floor between the chairs with her head like close so I can reach down. And I'm just driving through there so I don't get pulled over. I want to spend some time with her.
He knows she was dead, but then he also says, I wanted to spend some time with her. This was the optimal condition to be able to have a relationship experience with her because she's not going to fight back. She's not going to protest. You see that his value for human life is that they're objects, and that is very clearly that psychopathic trait that we see in individuals where there's no real value for human life.
Stumble over real quick because I got somebody coming down the dirt road real quick. I throw her in as far as I can swing her out to. I just left her there. She's like face down. You can see it, the hair. I guarantee you see it. It just became reckless. I tried to cover up evidence, but nobody knows she's missing. Nobody reported her missing. These are out here chasing me around in a stolen car. Can you even notice it because he was missing? Hear more about material objects?
Connolly exemplifies failure to accept responsibility. This is a trait that we see in psychopathy where individuals will blame somebody or some event for their actions. So if only the police had noticed, like, why are they focused on this material object instead of a dead body? Why didn't anybody report her missing? I think it's also a product of his narcissism and the idea that he is, again, better than, smarter than, more capable than all of these people. The loved ones in her life, law enforcement, you name it.
Where am I going?
Well, sounds like we're gonna take you out to Fremont.
I can find it, dude. I'm just trying to do the right thing.
He's just totally disconnected to what he did. Connolly's clinical presentation isn't just about a fixed delusion. It isn't just about being a criminal. It's about being psychopathic. He is totally distanced himself and has no connection to the fact that that was a human being that he killed. You don't see any remorse. You don't see any feeling of guilt, a feeling of regret, a feeling of empathy for the fact that the victim is now dead.
Like right up here to the left, hit it with your, like this be a yard, bunch of toys. If we're on the right track, that's what it is. It's right past all that bruh.
St. Joe County Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering, can I get somebody to do a wellness check?
Sure.
His name is Father Renee Robert. He's not answering the phone, and that is unusual. And I'm not sure. I think my brother might have done something to hurt him and stole his car and everything. And I wanted to have him checked on to make sure.
What is his name?
His name is Stephen Murray. He made the comment to my dad or something that Father Renee was tied up, and my brother's a bit crazy. He's tied my sister up a couple years back and tried to kill her. So, I mean, you know, that's what we're afraid of, that he might have hurt the old man.
Report for Father Renee Robert was filed on Tuesday. Friends said when Father Renee stopped updating his social media, they knew something must be wrong.
Hey.
Come on.
Nothing. What you doing?
broke into a couple houses, got some food.
I just want you to do right.
Then my life's gone now, Gene. I threw my life away.
No, it's not gone, Bubba. It's not the end.
Gene, it's gone, Gene. I got like 10 burglaries here in South Carolina, like 1 in North Carolina. I was in the raid, you know. I got a back seat full of guns in the front seat. I got a bag full of ammunition. I'm loaded, ready to go to war like being locked.
Murray is referring to himself as someone who is notorious and synonymous with a terrorist. And that level of self-importance that he's placing on his value is revealing. It gives us some indication into his narcissism, as well as his willingness maybe to harm others.
I don't know, Gene. I'm really hurting. The minute I realized that I had done killed somebody, Gene, I cried for 2 days because I know that I just threw my life away. I know that I did because I know that I didn't do it right. I know that I left my fingerprints somewhere. I know I left my DNA there, and I just cried and bawled my eyes out.
His crying is really all about him and how he messed up the crime scene and how he's done because of what he did. You don't hear anything about compassion or empathy for his victim. He's crying about his circumstance, wants to be consoled in some way.
Just tell me, is Father Renee dead or alive?
Dead, Gene. He's dead. I'm sick, Gene. I'm really, really sick, Gene. I'm ill. I know what I did, and I know I have to accept it.
All right, you hang in there. We're going to figure it out.
I love you.
All right, love you too.
After a tip was called in from someone who spotted Father Renee's car near Aiken, South Carolina, U.S. Marshals were able to locate Murray. He then led authorities on a high-speed chase that ended with the car crashing into a tree.
He threatened to kill as many cops as he could, and and you're out there in the middle of the woods, and you got a guy in there with rifles and scopes.
Let's see if I can reach here. Oh, man. Where'd you do your time at? I'm not 20-something for me. I'm very tired, man. I wish somebody could just help me. Just take this from me, man. That's what I'm here for. I drove all the way from Florida. Tell me what I need to do to help you. Put me in a bag and shoot me in the head. Well, we're here and we're conducting an investigation on Father Renee. And we need your help to try to find him.
What do you think he is right now?
I don't know. He meant as much to me as probably he did anybody else that's out there looking for him. I'm gonna catch you. Yeah, we're gonna have fully loaded.
Despite claims that he wanted to go out, death by cop, suicide by cop, he created barriers to them being able to catch him. He stole the victim's car, he crashed it into a tree, lured the police officers into the woods, and ultimately, what I suspect was going on with Murray is he was enjoying the thrill of getting them running.
Sick.
And what's sick to you, though?
Not somebody even want to decide. That's all. So you probably would run me off. And you probably Might want to go ahead and shoot me in the head right now.
It's manipulative, and he feels sorry for himself, and he feels bad for his circumstance. So he's telling them something which is kind of wacky, just shoot me, let's get this over with. There's something foolish about the idea that the police are going to be sympathetic to a guy that, in cold blood murders a priest.
Where we see some of Murray's psychopathy manifest is in some of the grandiosity and how he's handling this interview with the detectives. Murray has that kind of willingness to play cat and mouse, to manipulate authorities, and a total lack of appreciation for the seriousness of what's going on here. He is getting his high off of this. He is enjoying the power and control and the fact that he can absolutely control the narrative.
He was like, look, I want to tell you something. I got this guy, he gives me money. He's an old man, he's a priest, and he looks out for me, Okay, that's cool, It's cool. And she said, you want to meet him? I'm like, sure,
How do he treat you?
Always treat me good. Love, respect. He was always a good man. He always helped me. This person has helped me out to the extent where nobody else would. I could call this person and say, hey, I need $200 for me.
This guy, in essence, is a parasite. He doesn't know how to have real relationships with people. He doesn't know how to be empathic or to show genuine appreciation. So as long as you're feeding him, he's a happy guy. He's getting what he needs. But if circumstances change and need be, he'll pull the trigger.
Father Rene provided him care, he provided him comfort, he provided him money. But either way, the irony is that this individual who treated him with such kindness, he still was able to treat as an object and dispose of him. He no longer had a purpose.
When did you get his call?
He didn't know that I was going to meet somebody for some weed. Which I didn't tell him that because, he's a priest and he's got a lot going on, and I wasn't going to tell him that, because out of respect.
What happened out with JP?
I dropped him off, and I never came back. I ended up doing drugs, and I never came back and got him. And that's how I got his call.
For most psychopaths, relationships are entirely transactional. They have to be getting something out of it. They have to be gaming the other person. They have to be acquiring something. It could be sex, money, whatever the resources are.
What did you do after that?
Just drove.
Murray believes he's a smarter criminal, and if he just continues to deny, without a body, what are they going to do? How are they going to charge him? And even the detectives, truth be told, do realize that without a confession and without a body, they are going to have a difficult time arresting him.
I felt so ashamed of what I did, I just left this man standing there, out in the middle of the cold,
You're the last person I saw him, and I think you can help me.
No, I can't. So if you're going to keep on trying to dig at me, then we ain't got nothing to talk about. I told you what I had to tell you. That digging's not going to get you nowhere. It's just going to put you in a hole.
What do you think? Is he dead?
I couldn't tell you. Me personally, I don't know. I couldn't tell you if he's dead or alive. I couldn't tell you if he needs help, medical help or nothing, because I don't know.
If he is somewhere out there still alive, it's getting to be a couple of days, and we need to know where he's at so we can help him.
Yeah, definitely. If there was something I could do to help you, do that, I would.
We see pathological lying in this interrogation all over the place. He continues to look at these detectives so sincerely. They're talking about life, and he's just trying to be so cooperative and congenial, and he continues to play dumb. I have no idea where this person is. If I could tell you, I would. And he doesn't even blink an eye. His eye contact, his affect seems very credible and very stable and consistent, and yet it's all a lie.
Another interview?
Yeah. Well, hold on.
I won't be long, I promise.
Oh, man. I'm so glad you was in here.
When a female detective walks into the interrogation, Murray's affect, his demeanor, his body language, everything shifts and it becomes brighter. He sits back, you see a level of confidence in how he's interacting with this female detective, and he's starting to flirt with her. Murray's using what we think of with psychopathic behavior as superficial charm, and this is absolutely a marker of psychopathy.
You have a decent brain and decent heart in you. So why are you here with this kind of?
You have a pretty face.
Murray isn't acknowledging her or addressing her with the same distance that he does the male detectives. It's possible he doesn't actually even see her as an authority figure or law enforcement. He just sees her as a potential female who he can victimize. He's actually trying to put her in her place. He's trying to overtake her and victimize her and humiliate her by calling her out on how attractive she is.
You've got a decent head on your shoulders. Why would you get messed up with something that you got to be sitting in a sheriff's office at some ungodly hour?
Well, you know, it's like you got this baby, newborn baby, and you raise that baby. And hate, hurt, and strove to rape, you know, and the baby grows up on that.
Becomes a product of their environment.
Becomes a product of the environment. And now I deal with crying. Cry so hard. I tried my whole life to change who I am. I'm a sick puppet.
He's pouring it on thick because he wants the officers to see him as a sick person. And he's taking almost like a passive victim role himself.
Where'd you go tomorrow?
You remember that? Downtown. That's been famous. Okay.
That's what you want to leave it at. Change your mind and you want to tell me the actual truth, Stephen? Please do.
You call me a liar?
No,
How dare you? So would love a cigarette, though, man.
We can probably take care of that.
Running 100 miles an hour, I'm gonna tell y'all everything y'all need to know.
All right. It's your show, brother. We're just here to watch. Tell us.
All right.
He's coming down off the power and control dynamic. What's going to happen from here on out is at the hands of law enforcement and their discretion and their procedures. What we do see is a very deflated, flat person who no longer is congenial. He's no longer showing grandiosity and arrogance and an ego. Yet there's no humility either. This isn't somebody who looks broken because he realizes that he has remorse and empathy for what he's done to this human being.
The first part of the story I told y'all where Father Renee picked me up, which was true, and I went down to the dope trap. I ended up getting some crack and smoking, which I normally don't do, man. I just been, stressed out, a lot of going on, man. And we went up to South Carolina against his will. I mean, it wasn't.
What do you mean by that?
Against his will means he didn't have a choice. He was still okay. I mean, I wasn't aggressive with it or anything, you know. I wanted to go see my kids, you know.
Right.
And I really wanted to see my kids, and I know I was at a breaking point, you know, where I was just tired.
Murray is admitting that he lied to Father Renee. He essentially lured him in to gain access to his car. He's sharing some information with detectives about his willingness to lie, even to a priest.
How did you get him to get in the trunk?
I asked him to.
You just said, hey, I need you to get in that trunk right there?
I need you to get in the trunk, Father Renee.
Did you say or else?
No, I didn't say or else. I said, I need you to get in the trunk, Father Renee. He said, okay. I'm riding in there, you know. I helped him in there and told him, I said, just do what I tell you to and everything's going to be okay, you know.
Did he seem scared?
Not really. I mean, he never changed his demeanor the whole time.
Maybe he didn't want to be viewed by the priest as someone who's engaging in criminal behavior. By putting him in the trunk, the priest wouldn't see him doing naughty things.
He also may get a high that is just a simple power and control high from overpowering another human being, which we see in this crime against the priest.
And, I'm talking to him, and he's still telling me, that I'm in great trouble, and maybe I am in a great deal of trouble, Sure. If he gonna go back and tell on me, though, and get me in trouble, and let's go ahead and get rid of you,
This dynamic between them, the way he describes it, is very much like a parent and a child. You're going to be in a great deal of trouble.
He kept asking me to use the bathroom. So I stopped and let him out use the bathroom. I had a 9mm.
You got that from one of the burglaries you did?
Yes, sir. And I shot him.
Where'd you shoot him at?
Shot him in the, I think, the chest one time and the head the last time.
He puts one in his chest. That means he was facing him directly, and then one in his head. He shot him directly, eye to eye, which is really chilling. So the priest saw it coming. I mean, it's really miserably cruel. It really reveals how vicious a guy this person is.
Did you ever tell Father Rene that, anything along the lines that you were going to have to kill him?
No, sir. Okay.
At this point, we see Murray somewhat regressed in this interview because now he addresses the detective, no, sir. He starts talking like a child would address an adult.
So you don't think he had any idea that that's what your plan was?
And, I was just having a big hoping with everything that I have hid already and, the things that I'm gonna have to face,
Right.
And it didn't sink in too well, my man, because it just made things worse, and I just cried and cried and cried. I cried for days on end, Right. I didn't stop crying, because I know that I had up and I couldn't take none of it back, man. I just gave my whole life away,
Murray
On the evening of February 10th, 2019, the town of Motueka was settling into the kind of quiet that people rarely notice until it is gone. The sun had already disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind a fading wash of color over Tasman Bay. The air carried the lingering warmth of a New Zealand summer day, though night was beginning to cool the streets. Along Memorial Drive, traffic had thinned. Porch lights glowed softly outside family homes. Curtains were drawn. Televisions flickered behind windows. For most residents, it was an ordinary Sunday evening drifting toward an ordinary Monday morning. Nothing about that night suggested it would become one of the darkest chapters in the town's memory. Motueka is not the kind of place people associate with murder investigations. Nestled near orchards, beaches, and national parks, it is known for its natural beauty and close-knit community. It is a place where familiar faces appear in grocery stores, where neighbors recognize each other's vehicles, where local news usually revolves around weather, tourism, and community events rather than violent crime. Yet somewhere inside a home on Memorial Drive, something had already gone terribly wrong. Long before flashing emergency lights illuminated the street, before police tape stretched across sections of the property, before investigators arrived carrying cameras and evidence bags, a tragedy had already unfolded behind closed doors. A tragedy involving a child. A baby only 5 months old. At some point during that evening, emergency services received a call that would set an entire chain of events into motion. Dispatchers gathered information. Police officers were sent. Paramedics were dispatched. What they expected to find during those first moments remains unknown to the public. What they actually encountered would change everything. When emergency responders arrived at the residence, they discovered a scene that immediately raised alarm. Inside the home was a 5-month-old baby boy. The child was dead. Nearby, a 41-year-old woman had suffered serious injuries. Her condition was severe enough that she would later be transported by helicopter to Nelson Hospital for urgent treatment. The details of exactly what happened inside that house have never been publicly released. The public does not know the precise sequence of events. The public does not know what was said in the moments before the tragedy. The public does not know what investigators saw when they first entered the residence. And perhaps most haunting of all, the public does not know what happened during the final moments of the infant's life. Those missing details created a silence around the case that has remained for years. In many homicide investigations, information emerges quickly. Detectives release timelines. Witnesses speak to reporters. Court documents reveal motives, relationships, and crucial evidence. Piece by piece, the public begins to understand what happened. But the Motueka case was different. Almost from the beginning, a veil settled over the investigation. Authorities acknowledged that a child had died. Authorities confirmed that a woman had suffered serious injuries. Authorities announced the launch of a homicide investigation. But beyond those facts, very little emerged. The gaps in the story seemed almost as significant as the facts themselves. As police officers secured the property, residents began noticing unusual activity. Patrol vehicles appeared. Investigators moved through the area. Questions spread faster than answers. People who lived nearby looked out their windows. Some saw flashing lights. Some saw police arriving and leaving. Some heard fragments of information passed from one person to another. A death. A child. A possible homicide. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but everyone understood that something terrible had occurred. In small communities, tragedy travels differently. In large cities, people often remain strangers even when living only a few doors apart. But in towns like Motueka, connections run deep. Families know families. Generations grow up together. News is personal because there is always a chance that the people involved are not strangers at all. When a child dies under suspicious circumstances, the shock extends far beyond a single household. It reaches schools, workplaces, churches, community groups, entire neighborhoods. A feeling settles over the town that is difficult to describe but impossible to ignore. People begin asking questions they hope never to ask. How could something like this happen here? Who was involved? Was it an accident? Was it intentional? Could it have been prevented? And perhaps most painfully, why would a baby become the center of a homicide investigation? Days passed. Then more days. Investigators continued their work. Forensic specialists examined evidence. Witnesses were interviewed. Family members and individuals connected to the residents were questioned. Police maintained that the investigation remained active. Yet despite all the work occurring behind the scenes, very little information reached the public. That silence became part of the mystery. Every homicide investigation contains two stories. The first story is the crime itself. The second story is the search for truth. Sometimes the search unfolds in public view. Sometimes it unfolds almost entirely in the shadows. This case belonged to the second category. Behind closed doors, investigators were trying to reconstruct a sequence of events that ended with the death of a 5-month-old child and the severe injury of an adult woman. They examined physical evidence. They analyzed statements. They worked to separate fact from speculation. Meanwhile, outside the investigation, rumors inevitably began to circulate. That often happens when information is scarce. People attempt to fill gaps with assumptions. Questions become theories. Theories become stories. Stories become accepted as truth even when no evidence exists to support them. Police repeatedly urged caution. What they knew and what the public knew were not the same thing. The investigation was moving forward, but not in a way visible to outside observers. Then came a development that confirmed investigators believed a crime had occurred. On February 28, more than 2 weeks after the death of the infant, authorities arrested a 42-year-old woman. She was charged with murder. The announcement transformed the case. Until then, many questions remained unanswered regarding the nature of the incident itself. A murder charge changed the conversation entirely. Investigators had reached a point where they believed sufficient evidence existed to accuse someone of causing the baby's death. Yet even this major development arrived with limitations. The accused woman appeared before Christchurch District Court. But her identity was suppressed. The public could not learn her name. The media could not publish identifying details. The reasons behind the suppression order were not fully disclosed publicly, but the result was clear. One of the central figures in the case remained anonymous. That anonymity deepened the mystery. People could discuss the case. They could discuss the charge. But they could not discuss the identity of the accused. For journalists, it was an unusual challenge. For the public, it was frustrating. For investigators, however, the focus remained elsewhere. Their responsibility was not to satisfy public curiosity. Their responsibility was to pursue justice. As court proceedings continued, another detail emerged. Defense counsel requested a psychiatric assessment. A judge ordered that the accused woman undergo mental health evaluation at the secure forensic unit of Hillmorton Hospital. Immediately, new questions appeared. Was mental illness a factor? Had investigators uncovered evidence suggesting psychological instability? Could the tragedy have stemmed from a mental health crisis? Or was the assessment merely a routine precaution during a serious criminal proceeding? The public received no definitive answers. And once again, uncertainty became part of the story. Years later, many of those questions remain unresolved in the public record. The exact relationship between the accused woman and the child has never been widely disclosed. The precise cause of death has not been publicly detailed. The nature of the injuries suffered by the 41-year-old woman remains unclear. The alleged motive has never been publicly explained. The final outcome of the proceedings remains difficult to trace through publicly available reporting. What remains is a case surrounded by silence. A case defined as much by what is unknown as by what is known. A case that began on a quiet summer evening in a peaceful New Zealand town. A case involving a baby who never had the chance to tell his story. And as we begin to examine the events surrounding the Motueka murder investigation, one unsettling reality hangs over every detail that follows. Somewhere within the unanswered questions, the sealed records, the protected identities, and the fragments of information released to the public, there exists a complete story. Investigators spent countless hours trying to uncover it. Families were forced to live through it. A community was forever affected by it. And at the center of it all was a 5-month-old child whose life ended before it had truly begun. The challenge is not simply understanding what happened. The challenge is understanding how a seemingly ordinary evening in one of New Zealand's quiet coastal towns became the starting point of a homicide investigation that would leave behind more questions than answers. Motueka sits near the northern edge of New Zealand's South Island, a place where mountains, rivers, orchards, and sea seem to exist in quiet agreement with one another. Visitors often arrive searching for scenery. Locals stay because life moves at a different pace there. The town is not isolated from the rest of the world, but it possesses a rhythm that feels removed from the noise and urgency of larger cities. On most mornings, the day begins with the sound of vehicles heading toward farms, businesses opening their doors, and residents carrying out routines that have remained unchanged for years. It is the sort of community where people recognize faces even if they do not know names, where casual greetings become part of everyday life, and where major tragedies are remembered long after headlines disappear. To understand why the events of February 2019 struck so deeply, it is necessary to understand the environment in which they occurred. Motueka was not a place known for shocking acts of violence. News stories from the region more often focused on tourism, agriculture, local events, and the changing seasons. The nearby coastline attracted visitors from around the world. The surrounding landscape offered some of the most beautiful scenery in the country. Families raised children there because it felt safe. Elderly residents remained because it felt familiar. Young couples built futures because it felt stable. Yet every community, no matter how peaceful it appears from the outside, contains private struggles hidden behind closed doors. The reality of human life is that suffering rarely announces itself publicly. Arguments happen in quiet kitchens. Mental health crises unfold in bedrooms where nobody else can see. Families carry burdens that neighbors may never suspect. People smile in public while battling darkness in private. When a tragedy eventually emerges into public view, it often leaves observers shocked not because hardship was absent, but because hardship had remained invisible. Memorial Drive stretched through part of this seemingly peaceful community. Like many residential streets, it was lined with homes that reflected ordinary family life. Lawns needed mowing. Mailboxes stood near driveways. Vehicles came and went throughout the day. Children played in nearby areas. Nothing about the street itself suggested it would become associated with a homicide investigation. Yet long before police vehicles arrived, before journalists began making inquiries, before residents exchanged concerned conversations across fences and sidewalks, the house at the center of the future investigation was simply another home among many. From the outside, there was little reason to pay special attention to it. The details of daily life inside that residence remain largely unknown. Public records reveal very little. Authorities intentionally withheld significant information to protect privacy and preserve the integrity of legal proceedings. As a result, much of what happened inside the home before the tragedy remains hidden from public view. What is known is that a 5-month-old baby boy was present there. At 5 months old, life exists in its earliest stages of discovery. The world is still a collection of unfamiliar shapes and sounds. Faces become recognizable. Voices become comforting. Simple moments carry enormous meaning. A smile from a parent. The warmth of being held. The security of familiar surroundings. A child that young possesses no understanding of danger, conflict, or fear in the way adults do. Their existence revolves around trust. Every need, every comfort, every moment of safety depends entirely on the adults responsible for their care. That reality is part of what makes crimes involving infants so difficult for communities to process. Adults can make choices. Adults can leave dangerous situations. Adults can seek help. An infant cannot. A baby depends completely on others. The death of a child therefore creates a unique form of grief. It is not only the loss of a life. It is the loss of possibilities. Every future milestone vanishes at once. First words. First steps. School years. Friendships. Dreams. Adulthood. A lifetime disappears before it has the chance to unfold. Somewhere within the residence on Memorial Drive, that future existed in the form of a 5-month-old boy. Nobody outside the immediate circle surrounding the child could have imagined that within a matter of hours, his name would become part of a homicide investigation. The adult woman later found seriously injured also remains largely unknown to the public. Authorities confirmed her age. Authorities confirmed the seriousness of her injuries. Authorities confirmed that she required emergency transportation by helicopter to Nelson Hospital. Beyond those facts, almost everything else remains hidden. The public does not know her role within the household. The public does not know her relationship to the infant. The public does not know what she witnessed. The public does not know what she endured during the events that unfolded. This absence of information creates an unusual challenge when examining the case. Most true crime stories become defined by details. Names. Timelines. Relationships. Personal histories. Court testimony. This case instead is defined by silence. And yet that silence tells its own story. The decision to withhold information did not occur without reason. New Zealand courts often impose restrictions when vulnerable individuals are involved, particularly children. The justice system balances public interest with privacy, fairness, and protection for those affected by tragedy. In this case, those protections resulted in large portions of the narrative remaining inaccessible to the public. For investigators, however, every hidden detail mattered. Every relationship mattered. Every interaction mattered. Every hour leading up to February 10th mattered. Because somewhere inside those details existed an explanation for what eventually occurred. Outside the home, life in Motueka continued as normal. People attended work. Children went to school. Tourists visited nearby attractions. The summer season continued. Most residents had no reason to suspect that one of the most significant criminal investigations in recent local memory was quietly beginning to take shape. When tragedies occur in major cities, they often become one story among many. News cycles move quickly. Public attention shifts. Distances create emotional separation. Small towns experience events differently. In smaller communities, a single tragedy can reshape the emotional atmosphere of an entire region. People know someone who knows someone. Connections overlap. Stories become personal. The emotional impact extends outward in widening circles. A family suffers directly. Friends suffer alongside them. Neighbors feel the shock. The broader community begins carrying a collective grief. As details about the child's death slowly emerged, that process began in Motueka. Residents sought answers. Many struggled to understand how such a tragedy could occur within their community. The fact that authorities immediately launched a homicide investigation signaled the seriousness of what investigators believed had taken place. This was not being treated as an unexplained medical emergency. This was not being treated as an accidental death. Detectives believed there were circumstances requiring a full criminal investigation. That distinction changed everything. The atmosphere surrounding the case shifted from sadness to uncertainty. Questions multiplied. What happened inside the house? Who was involved? Why had the child died? What role did the injured woman play in the events? Were investigators searching for a dangerous individual? Authorities soon clarified one important point. They were not seeking additional suspects. For the public, that statement provided some reassurance. It suggested investigators believed the people connected to the incident were already known. At the same time, it intensified curiosity about what exactly had occurred. As days turned into weeks, investigators worked largely outside public view. Forensic examinations continued. Witnesses were interviewed. Evidence was analyzed. Information was gathered piece by piece. Behind every major investigation lies an enormous amount of work invisible to the public. Detectives reconstruct timelines. Specialists analyze physical evidence. Statements are compared. Contradictions are examined. Small details that appear meaningless on their own become significant when connected to other facts. Some investigations produce immediate answers. Others require patience. This case appeared to belong to the second category. Meanwhile, the emotional weight of the tragedy remained. At the center of every investigative decision was a child whose life had ended before it truly began. That fact never changed. Regardless of what evidence emerged. Regardless of what legal proceedings followed. Regardless of what explanations might eventually surface. The death of a 5-month-old infant remained the defining reality of the case. As February progressed, investigators moved steadily toward conclusions hidden from public view. Residents saw little of that process. They saw only occasional updates. They saw official statements. They saw reminders that the investigation remained active. Then, more than 2 weeks after the tragedy, a major development arrived. An arrest. A murder charge. And with it, the realization that whatever had happened inside that house on Memorial Drive was no longer simply a mysterious death. It had become one of the most disturbing criminal cases the community had ever faced. The peaceful image of Motueka had not disappeared. The mountains still stood. The sea still rolled against the shore. The orchards still stretched across the landscape. But beneath the familiar beauty of everyday life lingered an uncomfortable truth. Even in places that seem safest. Even in communities built on trust. Even behind ordinary doors on ordinary streets. Darkness can exist unseen. And on the night of February 10, 2019, That darkness emerged into the open, leaving behind a grieving community, a dead child, unanswered questions, and an investigation that would continue to cast a shadow over Motueka long after the flashing emergency lights had disappeared from Memorial Drive. Every homicide case begins with a question. Who committed the crime? It is the question that dominates headlines, drives investigations, and captures public attention. But there is another question that is often far more important. Who was the victim? Before police reports. Before forensic examinations. Before court hearings and legal arguments. There was a life. A human being. A story. In the Motueka murder investigation, that story belongs to a child who lived for only 5 months. 5 months. It is a period so short that many adults struggle to comprehend it. A single season. A handful of calendar pages. A brief chapter in the life of a family. Yet within those months exists an entire world of first experiences. The first time a baby recognizes a familiar voice. The first smile that appears unexpectedly and changes exhausted nights into cherished memories. The first attempts to focus on faces. The first reactions to sunlight filtering through a window. The first moments of comfort in someone's arms. At 5 months old, a child exists in a state of pure dependence. The world is still new. Every sound is unfamiliar. Every face is important. Every day brings another discovery. There are no secrets. No ambitions. No grudges. No understanding of danger. Only trust. Absolute trust. The public has never been given many details about the infant at the center of this case. His name was not widely published. His family circumstances were not extensively discussed. His personality never had the opportunity to become known beyond the people closest to him. The privacy surrounding the case protected many details, but it also created an unusual absence. In many true crime stories, victims become known through photographs, interviews, and memories shared by loved ones. Audiences learn about their dreams, hobbies, relationships, and ambitions. Here, those details remain hidden. What remains visible is something simpler and, in some ways, even more heartbreaking. He was a baby. A child only 5 months old. That single fact carries enormous weight. Because when people hear the phrase 5 months old, they immediately understand how fragile life still is at that age. An infant cannot walk. An infant cannot speak. An infant cannot explain pain. An infant cannot seek help. An infant depends entirely upon the adults responsible for care and protection. Every meal. Every nap. Every moment of safety. Everything comes from the people surrounding that child. It is one of the most vulnerable stages of human life. Most parents remember those early months vividly. The interrupted sleep. The bottles. The blankets. The toys scattered across living rooms. The countless photographs documenting tiny changes that seem monumental at the time. A baby's growth during those months happens almost daily. Every week brings something new. A stronger grip. A brighter smile. A more focused gaze. A louder laugh. A greater awareness of the world. For families, these milestones become treasured memories. For the child involved in this case, countless future milestones would never arrive. There would be no first birthday. No first day of school. No childhood friendships. No teenage years. No adulthood. Everything that might have been ended before it truly began. That reality sits at the heart of this tragedy. Because homicide investigations often become consumed by details. Investigators analyze evidence. Journalists examine timelines. The public debates motives. Courtrooms focus on legal arguments. In the process, the victim can sometimes become secondary to the mystery. But here, it is important to pause and remember what was actually lost. A child. A future. A lifetime. Somewhere during those first 5 months, there were undoubtedly moments of happiness. Moments that never appeared in news reports. Moments known only to the people who cared for him. Perhaps there were mornings spent being held near a window while sunlight filled a room. Perhaps there were evenings when someone rocked him to sleep. Perhaps there were photographs taken because a family wanted to preserve memories that seemed precious. Those ordinary moments matter because they remind us that victims are not defined solely by the circumstances of their deaths. They are defined by their lives. Even when those lives are tragically short. One of the most difficult aspects of this case is the lack of public information regarding the child's daily world. The public does not know what his routine looked like. The public does not know who spent the most time caring for him. The public does not know the relationships that shaped his brief life. Investigators almost certainly learned many of those details during their work. Friends and relatives likely knew far more. But for those outside the immediate circle, the child remains largely anonymous. And yet, despite that anonymity, the emotional impact remains powerful. Perhaps because everyone understands what infancy represents. Infants symbolize beginnings, potential, hope, the belief that an entire future lies ahead. The death of an elderly person is tragic because a life ends. The death of an infant is tragic because a life barely begins. That distinction creates a unique kind of grief. Communities often struggle to process it. There is no logical explanation that feels sufficient. No answer that makes the loss easier to accept. The question of why becomes overwhelming. Why this child? Why now? Why did a life so new end so suddenly? The official investigation focused on finding factual answers. Detectives sought evidence. Prosecutors pursued legal accountability. Courts examined procedure. Those processes are necessary. Justice systems depend upon them. But beneath every legal document remained a deeper emotional reality. A baby was gone. No investigation could change that. No arrest could reverse it. No courtroom outcome could restore what had been lost. When communities encounter tragedies involving children, people often search for meaning. They look for lessons, warnings, explanations, anything that might reduce the sense of randomness. Yet some cases resist simple explanations. The Motueka case appears to be one of them. Even years later, many crucial details remain unavailable to the public. The circumstances surrounding the infant's death have never been fully revealed. The precise events leading to that evening remain unclear. The motivations behind the alleged crime remain largely hidden. The result is a story filled with unanswered questions. But there is one fact that remains beyond dispute. A 5-month-old child died. Everything else exists around that central truth. The investigation. The arrest. The legal proceedings. The public speculation. All of it began because a baby who should have been surrounded by safety and care instead became the victim at the center of a homicide investigation. For many people following the case, that fact was impossible to forget. Adults involved in criminal cases are often judged through the lens of their decisions. Children are different. Children evoke something instinctive. A desire to protect. A desire to shield them from harm. A desire to believe that some boundaries should never be crossed. When those boundaries are broken, the emotional impact extends far beyond the immediate family. Entire communities feel it. That is what happened in Motueka. Residents may not have known the child personally. Many likely never met him. Yet his death affected them. Because the loss of a child forces people to confront uncomfortable realities about vulnerability, trust, and the responsibilities adults carry. Somewhere within the hidden details of this case lies the complete story of the infant's final day. Investigators spent weeks trying to reconstruct it. Lawyers examined it. Judges reviewed evidence connected to it. But for the public, that story remains fragmented. Only small pieces are visible. A date. A location. A child. A death. An investigation. Those fragments may never provide a complete picture. What they do provide is a reminder. Behind every homicide case exists a victim whose story deserves to be remembered. Not because of how they died, but because they lived. Even if only for 5 months. Even if the world never learned much about them. Even if their name faded from headlines. For a brief period of time, that child occupied a place in the world. He was held. He was cared for. He was part of someone's family. He was part of someone's future. And when his life ended, a space was left behind that could never truly be filled. That absence became the silent center of the Motueka murder investigation. An absence that investigators would spend months trying to explain. An absence that a grieving family would carry long after public attention moved elsewhere. And an absence that remains at the heart of this story as we move toward the events of February 10, 2019, the night when everything changed forever. February 10, 2019 began like countless other summer days in Motueka. The town woke beneath clear skies. Residents moved through routines that felt familiar and predictable. People went to work. Families spent time together. Visitors explored the surrounding region. Cars traveled along roads that wound between homes, businesses, orchards, and coastline. Nothing about the day appeared destined to become part of a homicide investigation. As afternoon faded toward evening, the pace of life gradually slowed. The warmth of the day lingered in the air. Shadows lengthened across yards and driveways. Lights began appearing inside homes as darkness approached. Across the community, people settled into the ordinary rhythm of a Sunday night. Some prepared for the week ahead. Some watched television. Some shared meals with family. Some simply enjoyed the final hours before another workweek began. At a residence on Memorial Drive, however, events were unfolding that would eventually draw the attention of police, forensic investigators, journalists, and an entire community searching for answers. Exactly what happened inside that house remains one of the most closely guarded aspects of the case. The public has never been given a complete timeline. Authorities never released a detailed reconstruction of events. Court records available to the public revealed very little. As a result, there are moments during that evening that remain hidden behind legal restrictions, privacy protections, and unanswered questions. What can be said with certainty is that at some point during the evening, circumstances inside the residence escalated into a tragedy. A tragedy involving a 5-month-old infant. A tragedy involving an adult woman who would later be found seriously injured. A tragedy severe enough that emergency services were summoned. For investigators, emergency calls often become the first visible point in a sequence of events that began much earlier. When dispatchers receive a call, the crisis is already underway. Something has already happened. Someone has already been injured. Someone is already in danger. The call itself becomes a snapshot taken near the end of a story investigators must later reconstruct from the beginning. On that evening, emergency responders were directed to the home on Memorial Drive. The people answering the call could not yet know they were heading toward the scene of what would soon be classified as a homicide investigation. Police officers began responding. Medical personnel mobilized. Resources were directed toward the address. Every minute mattered. Yet despite the urgency of the response, some outcomes had already become irreversible. When emergency personnel arrived, they encountered a scene that immediately raised alarm. Inside the residence was a 5-month-old baby boy. The child was dead. Those 4 words would eventually appear in news reports and police statements. Simple words. Direct words. But words that carried devastating weight. For the responders who entered the home, the reality before them was not a headline or a case file. It was a child. A life that had ended far too soon. Emergency personnel are trained to function during moments most people hope never to witness. They move toward crisis rather than away from it. They make decisions under pressure. They confront situations that would overwhelm many others. Yet certain calls remain difficult regardless of experience. Cases involving children often belong to that category. Even for professionals accustomed to tragedy, the death of an infant can leave a lasting impact. Somewhere inside that residence, responders were confronted with exactly such a reality. But the child was not the only person requiring immediate attention. Authorities also discovered a 41-year-old woman suffering from serious injuries. The extent of those injuries was significant enough that emergency transport by helicopter was later required. The situation unfolding inside the house was clearly far beyond the scope of an ordinary medical emergency. Questions immediately emerged. What had happened? How had a 5-month-old child died? How had an adult woman sustained such severe injuries? Were the two events connected? Had someone attacked them? Was another person still present? Did an immediate threat remain? These are the kinds of questions first responders and investigators begin asking almost instinctively. At that stage, answers are rarely available. The priority becomes preserving life, securing the scene, and gathering information. The injured woman was transported for medical treatment. The child could not be saved. And outside the home, the first stages of a criminal investigation quietly began taking shape. One of the most striking aspects of this case is how little information authorities released regarding the events themselves. In many homicide investigations, police eventually disclose at least a broad outline of what occurred. Not here. The exact sequence of events remained hidden. The public was never told precisely when the child died. The public was never given a detailed explanation of the circumstances surrounding the woman's injuries. The public was never provided with a complete narrative describing what investigators believed had happened inside the residence. That absence of information would become one of the defining characteristics of the entire case. As darkness settled over Motueka, police activity around the property increased. Vehicles arrived. Officers established control of the scene. The ordinary appearance of the residential street was suddenly interrupted by the unmistakable signs of an unfolding investigation. For nearby residents, the transformation must have been jarring. Hours earlier, it had been another quiet Sunday evening. Now something serious was happening just beyond their windows. People noticed emergency vehicles. People noticed police presence. People noticed that something had gone terribly wrong. Yet few could have understood the full scale of the tragedy. Inside law enforcement circles, the situation was rapidly being assessed. Every suspicious death requires careful examination. Every unexplained fatality demands answers. When a child is involved, the level of scrutiny becomes even greater. Investigators cannot rely on assumptions. They cannot accept appearances at face value. Every detail must be examined. Every possibility must be considered. As officers processed the information available that night, it became increasingly clear that the circumstances warranted a homicide investigation. That decision carried enormous significance. A homicide investigation is not launched lightly. It signals that authorities believe a death may have resulted from criminal actions. It brings specialized investigators into the process. It transforms the focus from emergency response to criminal inquiry. For the community, that classification would soon alter perceptions of the entire event. A tragedy had occurred. But investigators believed it might also be a crime. Meanwhile, the physical location itself became critically important. Every room, every object, every trace of evidence. Investigators understand that scenes begin changing the moment an event occurs. Memories fade. Physical evidence deteriorates. Conditions shift. The sooner a scene can be secured, the greater the chance of preserving information necessary to determine what happened. That process would continue long after emergency responders completed their immediate duties. As the night progressed, the house on Memorial Drive ceased being simply a residence. It became the center of an investigation. A place where detectives would search for answers hidden within details invisible to everyone else. Somewhere inside the evidence collected that night, investigators hoped, lay the truth. The truth about how a 5-month-old child lost his life. The truth about how a woman suffered severe injuries. The truth about what occurred behind closed doors during those final hours. Yet on that first night, certainty remained elusive. There were facts. A dead infant. An injured woman. A residential address. An emergency response. Beyond those facts stretched a landscape of unknowns. The challenge facing investigators was immense. They needed to transform fragments into a coherent narrative. They needed to establish timelines. They needed to determine relationships. They needed to separate rumor from reality. Most importantly, they needed to speak for a victim who could never describe what had happened. As news of the incident slowly spread, shock rippled through Motueka. The details available were limited, but the central fact was impossible to ignore. A baby was dead. For many residents, that fact alone was enough to trigger grief and disbelief. Communities often expect tragedy to arrive from outside. A stranger. A distant threat. An unforeseeable event. Cases involving children challenge those assumptions. They force people to confront the uncomfortable reality that danger can emerge within environments that appear familiar and safe. That discomfort would remain present throughout the investigation. Because the events of February 10th were not merely shocking. They were deeply unsettling. The victim was not an adult involved in a dangerous lifestyle. The victim was not someone caught in a public confrontation. The victim was an infant. An infant whose entire world consisted of the adults entrusted with his care. As investigators worked through the night and into the days that followed, one fact remained at the center of everything. A 5-month-old child had died under circumstances serious enough to trigger a homicide investigation. No matter what evidence eventually emerged, no matter what legal proceedings followed, no matter what explanations might later be offered, that reality could never be changed. The evening of February 10th marked the point at which an ordinary home became a crime scene, an ordinary town became the focus of national attention, and a brief young life became the silent center of a search for truth. The full story remained hidden. The answers remained buried within evidence still being examined. But from that night forward, the course of the investigation had been set. Detectives would begin following every lead. Forensic specialists would examine every clue. Witnesses would be interviewed. Timelines would be reconstructed. And somewhere within that process, authorities hoped they would eventually uncover what had happened during the final hours of a child whose future ended before it had truly begun. By the time the first emergency responders left Memorial Drive, the focus of the night had already begun to shift. The immediate crisis had passed. The injured woman had been transported for urgent medical care. The infant could not be saved. What remained was a scene filled with unanswered questions. For police, those questions would become the beginning of an investigation that would stretch far beyond the boundaries of a single evening. In homicide investigations, the first hours are often among the most important. Memories are still fresh. Evidence remains undisturbed. Witnesses can be identified before details become confused by conversation, media coverage, or speculation. Every decision made during those early stages carries weight. Investigators understand that the truth rarely reveals itself all at once. More often, it exists in fragments scattered across a scene, hidden within timelines, conversations, physical evidence, and human behavior. The challenge is finding those fragments and fitting them together. On Memorial Drive, detectives faced precisely that challenge. The property was secured. Access became restricted. The home that had once been part of an ordinary residential neighborhood was now being treated as a potential crime scene. To passing residents, the visual change would have been impossible to ignore. Police activity continued. Investigators moved through the area. The atmosphere surrounding the property had transformed completely. Yet while people outside the investigation could see that something serious had occurred, they could not see the painstaking process unfolding behind the scenes. Crime scenes speak a language of details. A misplaced object. A damaged surface. A trace of biological evidence. A timestamp on a device. A statement that does not align with physical findings. Each detail may appear insignificant on its own. Together, they can reveal an entire sequence of events. The investigators entering the residence understood that every room potentially contained information. Every observation mattered. Every photograph mattered. Every measurement mattered. Every note mattered. Unlike television dramas, real homicide investigations are often slow and methodical. Detectives do not rush toward dramatic conclusions. They move carefully. They document everything. They revisit details repeatedly. They challenge assumptions. They test theories against evidence rather than forcing evidence to fit theories. The scene on Memorial Drive demanded that level of caution. After all, a child had died. The circumstances surrounding that death were not immediately clear. And an adult woman had suffered severe injuries. The relationship between those facts had to be understood. The public would eventually learn that authorities had launched a homicide investigation. That announcement alone communicated an important message. Investigators believed the death required criminal scrutiny. They were not treating the event as a straightforward accident. They were not treating it as a routine medical matter. Something about the evidence, circumstances, or available information justified a far more serious response. Yet despite the significance of that decision, police remained notably restrained in what they shared publicly. This restraint would become one of the defining characteristics of the entire case. In many investigations, law enforcement releases specific details to generate leads or reassure the public. Here, information emerged only in limited fragments. Authorities confirmed that a child had died. Authorities confirmed that a woman had been seriously injured. Authorities confirmed that a homicide investigation was underway. Beyond that, much remained hidden. For detectives, however, the lack of public information did not mean a lack of investigative activity. Quite the opposite. The days following a suspicious death are often filled with an enormous amount of work invisible to everyone outside the investigation. Officers identify individuals connected to the scene. Statements are collected. Timelines are reconstructed. Digital records may be examined. Medical information is reviewed. Forensic specialists process evidence. Every piece of information becomes part of a growing puzzle. One particularly important aspect of this investigation involved the people who had been present at or connected to the residence. Police publicly acknowledged that they were speaking with individuals associated with the home. That statement may sound routine, but it reveals a great deal about the direction of the investigation. Detectives were not immediately focused on an unknown stranger. They were examining the people already within the circle of events. This approach is common in many homicide investigations. Statistically, victims often know the individuals involved in crimes against them. Investigators therefore begin by examining relationships, interactions, and circumstances surrounding those closest to the event. Who was present? Who had contact with the victim? Who could provide information about the hours leading up to the tragedy? Who could help establish an accurate timeline? The answers to such questions frequently determine the course of an investigation. For the Motueka case, however, the public was given very few details about these interviews. Names were not released. Specific relationships were not discussed. The content of witness statements remained confidential. This secrecy fueled speculation. Whenever information is scarce, people naturally attempt to fill the gaps. Rumors begin. Assumptions spread. Theories emerge. Yet investigators understand that speculation can be dangerous. Rumors often contaminate memories. False narratives can influence witnesses. Public pressure can distract attention from evidence. That is why experienced detectives focus on facts rather than assumptions. Somewhere within the information gathered from witnesses and individuals connected to the residents, investigators hoped to uncover a clearer picture of what had happened on February 10th. Meanwhile, forensic work continued. Although authorities never publicly disclosed the specific findings recovered from the scene, forensic examinations likely played a central role in the investigation. Modern homicide investigations rely heavily on science. Physical evidence often reveals information that human memory cannot. Objects retain traces. Surfaces preserve clues. Injuries tell stories. Forensic analysis can confirm, challenge, or completely overturn initial assumptions. In cases where public information is limited, forensic findings often become even more significant because they provide investigators with objective facts independent of witness accounts. At the same time, medical examinations would have been critical. The death of the infant required careful review. The injuries sustained by the adult woman required examination as well. Medical evidence often helps investigators establish timelines, determine mechanisms of injury, and evaluate whether statements align with physical realities. Again, the public was not given detailed information regarding these findings. Yet behind the scenes, investigators were almost certainly using such evidence to narrow possibilities and eliminate uncertainties. As the days passed, another challenge emerged. The community wanted answers. A child had died. Residents understandably sought explanations. People wanted reassurance. They wanted clarity. They wanted to understand whether any danger remained. Police responded to these concerns in a measured way. One of the most significant statements released during the investigation was that authorities were not seeking additional suspects. That announcement carried substantial implications. It suggested investigators believed the individuals relevant to the case had already been identified. The threat, if there had ever been one, was not believed to be roaming freely through the community. For residents, this likely provided some comfort. At the same time, it intensified curiosity. If police were not searching for unknown suspects, then where exactly was the investigation leading? What had detectives discovered? What evidence had they gathered? The public did not know. And investigators were not prepared to reveal their conclusions. Throughout the following days, the home on Memorial Drive remained a focal point. Even after crime scene activity diminished, the address itself carried a different meaning. Places become attached to events. A location that once blended into its surroundings suddenly acquires emotional weight. Residents passing by know what happened there. Neighbors remember the emergency vehicles. People associate the address with loss. For those living nearby, the memory often lingers long after physical signs of an investigation disappear. The psychological impact of a child homicide investigation extends beyond immediate family members. It affects first responders. It affects investigators. It affects communities. Everyone involved confronts a difficult reality. Somewhere within the chain of events that unfolded that evening, a child lost his life. No amount of forensic work could change that fact. No future arrest could erase it. The investigation's purpose was not to reverse the tragedy. Its purpose was to explain it. To establish accountability. To uncover truth. As detectives continued assembling evidence, the case gradually moved toward a critical turning point. The public could not yet see that turning point approaching. The investigation remained largely hidden from view. Behind closed doors, evidence was being evaluated. Statements were being compared. Theories were being tested. Questions were being answered one by one. Each new fact reduced uncertainty. Each new finding helped investigators move closer to understanding what had happened inside the house on Memorial Drive. For the outside world, however, the situation remained a mystery. News reports contained limited information. Official statements were brief. The story felt incomplete. And in many ways, it was. The investigation was still unfolding. Detectives were still searching for certainty. The most important questions remained unanswered. How had the infant died? What had happened to the injured woman? Who bore responsibility? The answers existed somewhere within the evidence. Investigators believed they could find them. The challenge was proving them. Because in criminal investigations, suspicion is never enough. Belief is never enough. Evidence must lead the way. Every conclusion must be supported by facts. Every accusation must withstand scrutiny. As February continued, detectives worked toward exactly that goal. And although the public could not yet see it, the investigation was steadily approaching a development that would alter the course of the case. An arrest. A murder charge. and a new set of questions that would prove just as complex as the ones investigators faced on the night the tragedy began. Every homicide investigation enters a phase where uncertainty becomes its greatest obstacle. The crime scene has been examined. Initial witness interviews have been conducted. Evidence has begun moving through laboratories and forensic review processes. The immediate chaos of the first hours has faded. What remains is a long and often frustrating search for clarity. For the investigators working the Motueka case, that phase began almost immediately after the events of February 10, 2019. A 5-month-old infant was dead. A 41-year-old woman had suffered serious injuries. The public knew only a handful of facts. The detectives knew considerably more. Yet even with access to evidence unavailable to everyone else, investigators still faced the same fundamental challenge confronting every homicide team. They needed to establish exactly what happened. Not what people assumed had happened. Not what rumors suggested had happened. What actually happened. That distinction matters because criminal investigations are often shaped by uncertainty long before they are shaped by certainty. In the days following the tragedy, detectives would have been confronted by countless possibilities. Every serious investigation begins broadly. Investigators do not start with a conclusion. They start with questions. Could an outside individual have been involved? Could there have been multiple people connected to the events? Could witness recollections be incomplete? Could critical evidence still be missing? Could early assumptions prove wrong? These possibilities must all be examined before investigators can narrow their focus. From the outside, people often imagine detectives identifying a suspect almost immediately and then simply gathering proof. Reality is rarely so straightforward. The early stages of an investigation involve eliminating possibilities just as much as identifying them. Every lead must be evaluated. Every explanation must be tested. Every inconsistency must be explored. In a case involving the death of an infant, the burden becomes even greater. The victim cannot speak. The victim cannot explain what happened. The victim cannot provide investigators with a timeline. Everything must be reconstructed through evidence and the accounts of others. Somewhere inside the information gathered after February 10th existed the truth. The challenge was locating it. Publicly, police remained careful in their communications. Their statements were measured. Their disclosures were limited. That caution likely frustrated many people seeking answers, but it also reflected the reality of an active homicide investigation. Detectives protect information for a reason. Certain details may only be known to the person responsible. Certain facts can help investigators evaluate the credibility of future statements. Certain pieces of evidence must remain confidential to preserve the integrity of legal proceedings. As a result, much of the investigation unfolded beyond public view. The community saw only occasional updates. Investigators, meanwhile, were immersed in details. Hours became timelines. Timelines became theories. Theories were compared against evidence. Evidence either supported them or destroyed them. This process can be painstaking. Sometimes an investigative theory appears promising only to collapse under scrutiny. A witness statement may initially seem significant before later proving unreliable. A suspected timeline may unravel when new information emerges. Each setback forces investigators to begin again. Although authorities never publicly described every avenue they explored, it is reasonable to assume detectives examined every person connected to the residents and every individual present during the relevant time period. That is standard investigative practice. Relationships become important. Patterns become important. Behavior becomes important. The goal is not merely identifying who was present. The goal is understanding what occurred within the relationships surrounding the victim. This is often where homicide investigations become psychologically complex. Human behavior rarely follows simple patterns. People forget details. People misunderstand events. People interpret experiences differently. Some individuals cooperate fully. Others become defensive. Trauma affects memory. Shock alters perception. Investigators must navigate all of these challenges while trying to build an accurate reconstruction of events. The injured 41-year-old woman represented one of the most significant unanswered questions. Authorities confirmed that she had sustained serious injuries. Authorities confirmed that she required emergency medical treatment. Yet little else was disclosed. For detectives, her condition and her account of events would likely have been enormously important. An injured survivor can sometimes provide crucial insight into what occurred. At other times, medical circumstances, memory limitations, or other factors complicate the process. The public never learned how much information investigators were able to obtain. What remains clear is that detectives continued moving steadily forward. As the days passed, another force began exerting pressure on the investigation. Public curiosity. Few crimes generate stronger emotional reactions than those involving children. People wanted answers. Residents wanted reassurance. Journalists sought information. Questions circulated throughout the community. Some questions were reasonable. Others were speculative. The less information available, the more speculation tends to grow. This is one of the most difficult realities facing investigators. A vacuum of information rarely remains empty. People fill it. Theories emerge. Rumors spread. Stories evolve. Sometimes those stories bear little resemblance to reality. Police therefore found themselves balancing two competing responsibilities. They needed to protect the investigation. They also needed to maintain public confidence. One of the most important statements they released was that they were not seeking anyone else in connection with the incident. That statement may appear simple, but it carried significant implications. It suggested detectives had already narrowed their focus. The investigation was not expanding outward. It was becoming more concentrated. The circle surrounding the case was shrinking. For residents of Motueka, this likely eased fears regarding public safety. For investigators, however, it meant the burden of proof became increasingly important. Narrowing an investigation is only the beginning. Eventually detectives must be prepared to justify their conclusions. They must demonstrate how evidence supports their decisions. They must be able to explain why certain possibilities were rejected and others accepted. That process requires patience. And patience can be difficult when a grieving community demands answers. Meanwhile, another layer of complexity quietly emerged around the case. Mental health. At the time, the public knew very little about any psychological factors potentially connected to the investigation. That information would only become relevant later. Yet experienced investigators understand that mental health issues can sometimes play a significant role in serious criminal cases. This does not mean mental illness causes violence in most situations. The vast majority of individuals experiencing mental health challenges never commit violent crimes. However, when investigators encounter unusual circumstances, unexplained behavior, or complex personal histories, psychological factors may become one area requiring examination. Whether such factors were already attracting attention during the early investigation remains unknown. Authorities never disclosed enough information to answer that question. But as events unfolded, mental health considerations would become an increasingly significant part of the public narrative. Throughout this period, detectives continued assembling pieces of a puzzle hidden from public view. Every interview added information. Every forensic finding added context. Every timeline adjustment brought investigators closer to a conclusion. The process likely involved moments of uncertainty. Perhaps competing theories existed. Perhaps investigators disagreed at certain stages. Such disagreements are not uncommon. Good detectives challenge one another's assumptions because doing so strengthens investigations. The goal is not reaching conclusions quickly. The goal is reaching conclusions accurately. Slow certainty is preferable to fast error. As February moved toward its final days, the direction of the case gradually became clearer to those working behind the scenes. Evidence was accumulating. Questions were being answered. The broad field of possibilities was narrowing. Eventually, investigators reached a point where uncertainty no longer outweighed confidence. That moment represents one of the most significant thresholds in any criminal investigation. It is the point where detectives believe evidence supports action. Not suspicion. Not intuition. Action. For the public, however, that threshold remained invisible. Residents could not see investigative meetings. They could not review evidence. They could not hear witness interviews. They could only wait. And waiting often creates its own form of tension. Each day without answers deepened curiosity. Each day without an arrest fueled speculation. Each day without a clear explanation reinforced the mystery surrounding the case. Yet behind closed doors, detectives were steadily moving toward a decisive step. The work of the previous weeks was beginning to converge. Information gathered from the crime scene. Information gathered from witnesses. Information gathered through forensic analysis. Information gathered through investigative review. All of it was being evaluated together. The result would soon become public. But when that moment finally arrived, it would not provide complete clarity. Instead, it would introduce a new set of questions. Because the arrest that followed would reveal only part of the story. The identity of the accused would remain hidden. The details of the alleged crime would remain largely concealed. And the case would move into a legal process that would become every bit as mysterious as the investigation itself. For detectives, however, one thing had changed. The search for a suspect was ending. The search for proof was entering a new phase. And the tragedy that began on a quiet evening in Motueka was about to take a dramatic turn toward the courtroom, where evidence, law, and unanswered questions would collide in ways few members of the public could have anticipated. In every homicide investigation, there comes a moment when scattered fragments begin to form a recognizable picture. Weeks of interviews, forensic examinations, timeline analysis, and evidence review slowly converge toward a conclusion. Detectives who once faced dozens of possibilities find themselves narrowing their focus. Uncertainty begins giving way to confidence. Questions that once seemed impossible to answer become increasingly defined by facts. For the investigators working the Motueka case, that turning point arrived near the end of February 2019. For more than 2 weeks, the death of a 5-month-old infant had remained at the center of an active homicide investigation. Behind the scenes, detectives had been assembling information piece by piece. Publicly, very little had changed. Residents still knew only fragments of the story. Journalists continued working with limited information. The community remained trapped between grief and uncertainty. Then, on February 28, authorities made a move that signaled a major development. A 42-year-old woman was arrested. She was charged with murder in connection with the death of the infant. The announcement immediately transformed the investigation. For the public, it represented the first substantial indication that detectives believed they understood what had happened. For investigators, it marked the transition from gathering evidence to presenting it within the justice system. The arrest itself was significant, but it did not bring clarity in the way many people expected. In most major homicide cases, an arrest opens the door to new information. Names are released. Background details emerge. Journalists begin constructing profiles. Court documents provide insight into allegations. The public gradually learns who stands accused and why investigators believe they are responsible. This case unfolded differently. Almost immediately, another layer of mystery appeared. The accused woman's identity was suppressed. The public could not learn her name. Media organizations could not publish identifying details. The woman appeared before Christchurch District Court, but despite the seriousness of the charge, one of the central figures in the entire case remained anonymous. That anonymity created a striking contrast. On one hand, investigators were confident enough to pursue a murder charge. On the other hand, much of the story remained hidden from public view. The result was a case that felt simultaneously closer to resolution and further from understanding. The arrest answered one question. Had detectives identified someone they believed was responsible? Yes. But it left countless others unresolved. Who was the accused woman? What was her relationship to the child? What evidence led investigators to charge her? What had detectives uncovered during those crucial weeks? Why had the events of February 10th unfolded the way they did? The public still had no answers. Yet for investigators, the arrest was not based on speculation. Murder charges require evidence. Detectives must believe the information gathered during an investigation can withstand scrutiny within the legal system. Witness statements, forensic findings, medical evidence, timelines, physical evidence recovered from the scene. All of these elements likely contributed to the decision. The public never saw the complete picture. The investigators did. And whatever they discovered convinced them that the case should proceed through the courts. In many true crime stories, this would be the point where the narrative accelerates toward a courtroom battle. A suspect is identified. Evidence is revealed. Arguments begin taking shape. But the Motueka case continued to resist conventional expectations. Shortly after the murder charge became public, another development emerged. One that would alter how many observers viewed the case. The defense requested a psychiatric assessment. At first glance, such a request may not seem unusual. Mental health evaluations occur in criminal proceedings for various reasons. Courts sometimes need to determine whether a defendant understands the legal process. They may need to assess a person's ability to participate in their own defense. In some cases, broader questions regarding mental state become relevant. What made this development significant was not merely the request itself. It was what it suggested. The possibility that psychological factors could play an important role in understanding the case. The court ordered that the accused woman be assessed at the secure forensic unit of Hillmorton Hospital. This decision immediately generated speculation. People naturally began wondering whether mental illness might be connected to the events on Memorial Drive. Could investigators have uncovered evidence suggesting a mental health crisis? Could psychological instability help explain the tragedy? Was there information known to the court but not known to the public? The available public record provided no definitive answers. That uncertainty became yet another defining feature of the case. Mental health occupies a complicated place within criminal investigations. Popular culture often treats psychological issues as simple explanations for violence. Reality is far more complex. Most individuals living with mental illness never commit violent crimes. Most violent crimes are not committed because of mental illness. The relationship between mental health and criminal responsibility is nuanced, highly specific, and deeply dependent upon individual circumstances. That complexity was particularly relevant here. Because despite the public discussion generated by the psychiatric assessment, the court proceedings revealed very little regarding the accused woman's condition. No detailed diagnosis became publicly known. No comprehensive explanation emerged. No definitive narrative connected mental health to the alleged offense. Instead, observers were left with possibilities rather than conclusions. For detectives, however, the investigation had already reached its primary objective. They had identified a suspect. They had gathered evidence. They had secured a charge. Their work was now entering a different phase. The courtroom. Many people imagine arrests as endings. In reality, they are often beginnings. The investigation may establish probable responsibility, but the legal system must evaluate whether the evidence supports criminal accountability. The standards are high. The process is deliberate. Every conclusion is examined. Every allegation is challenged. Every assumption is tested. That transition from investigation to prosecution often exposes details previously hidden from public view. Yet in the Motueka case, the opposite seemed to occur. The closer the case moved toward legal proceedings, the less information appeared available. Identity suppression remained in place. Key facts remained undisclosed. The circumstances surrounding the death remained largely unknown. For journalists attempting to cover the story, this presented unusual challenges. A murder charge involving the death of an infant would ordinarily generate substantial reporting. Yet without names, detailed evidence, or extensive court disclosures, there was little concrete information to publish. As a result, public understanding remained fragmented. The arrest represented a breakthrough. But it was a breakthrough wrapped in secrecy. Even so, certain conclusions could be drawn. The decision to charge murder suggested investigators believed the child's death was not accidental. It suggested they believed responsibility could be attributed to a specific individual. And it suggested that evidence existed supporting that belief. Those conclusions alone carried enormous weight. Because behind every legal development remained the central tragedy. A 5-month-old infant had died. The charge did not change that fact. The psychiatric assessment did not change that fact. Identity suppression did not change that fact. Everything occurring within courtrooms and investigative offices ultimately traced back to the loss of a child. For the family, whatever form that family took, the legal process could never erase the grief. For the community, the arrest could not fully answer the emotional questions generated by the case. People often seek meaning after tragedies. They want explanations. They want certainty. They want narratives that transform confusion into understanding. Yet some cases refuse to provide those comforts. The Motueka investigation appeared increasingly likely to become one of those cases. Even after the arrest, even after the murder charge, enormous gaps remained. The public knew where the tragedy occurred. The public knew when it occurred. The public knew a child had died. The public knew a woman had been charged. Beyond that, much of the story remained locked behind legal protections and investigative confidentiality. And so the breakthrough that investigators achieved created an unusual situation. From a law enforcement perspective, progress had been made. From a public perspective, mystery remained. The case had advanced dramatically. Yet understanding had advanced only slightly. Still, the arrest marked a decisive turning point. The investigation was no longer searching for direction. It had found one. Detectives had crossed the threshold separating questions from accusations. Evidence had led them toward a specific conclusion. The legal system would now determine what happened next. But as the case moved deeper into court proceedings, another reality was becoming increasingly apparent. The search for truth and the search for justice are not always the same journey. One seeks facts. The other seeks accountability. And in the Motueka case, both journeys were about to enter territory shaped by legal complexity, mental health questions, privacy protections, and a level of public uncertainty rarely seen in major homicide investigations. The breakthrough had arrived. The arrest had been made. The charge had been laid. Yet the most difficult questions surrounding the case still remained unanswered. And it would be inside the courtroom, rather than the crime scene, that the next chapter of the story would unfold. The moment a suspect enters a courtroom, a criminal investigation changes forever. The language changes. The atmosphere changes. The questions change. The investigation is no longer only about what detectives believe happened. It becomes about what can be proven. It becomes a process where evidence must be examined, challenged, and measured against the highest standards of justice. For the Motueka case, the transition from investigation to legal proceedings created a new chapter filled with uncertainty. The arrest of a 42-year-old woman on a murder charge had been a major turning point. After weeks of searching for answers, investigators had reached the point where they believed they could move forward with prosecution. But an arrest is not the end of a case. It is the beginning of a different kind of battle. Inside the courtroom, every detail matters. Every piece of evidence must be questioned. Every statement must be examined. Every conclusion must survive scrutiny. The public often imagines justice as a simple path. A crime occurs. A suspect is identified. A trial begins. A verdict is delivered. But real legal processes are rarely that straightforward. They involve procedure, rights, medical evaluations, legal arguments, and careful consideration of facts. The Motueka case became particularly complex because of one factor that emerged after the arrest: the issue of mental health. When the defense requested a psychiatric assessment, it introduced a new dimension into the proceedings. The court was no longer dealing only with the question of what happened. It also faced questions about the accused woman's mental state and her ability to participate appropriately within the justice system. This distinction is extremely important. A person accused of a serious crime must be able to understand the legal process they are facing. They must be able to communicate with their lawyers. They must be able to participate in decisions affecting their defense. Courts take these matters seriously because the fairness of the entire justice system depends upon them. The order for assessment at the Secure Forensic Unit of Hill Morton Hospital therefore represented a significant moment. It indicated that professionals needed more information before the case could proceed. The public, however, remained largely outside that process. The identity of the accused woman remained suppressed. The details of the allegations remained limited. The evidence that led investigators to the murder charge was not publicly revealed in full. The result was a strange position for observers. They knew a serious crime had been alleged. They knew someone had been charged. They knew a child had died. But they did not know the complete story behind those facts. This lack of information created emotional tension. People wanted answers because the victim was a baby. The tragedy felt impossible to comprehend without explanation. A child who should have had a lifetime ahead of him had become the center of a murder case. For the family and those closest to the child, the legal process was not simply a matter of facts and procedures. It was connected to grief. Every court appearance represented a reminder of what had been lost. Every mention of the case brought the tragedy back into public attention. For investigators and prosecutors, however, emotion could not replace evidence. The legal system required something more precise: proof. The question before the court was not simply whether something terrible had happened. Everyone already knew that. The question was whether the evidence could establish responsibility beyond the required legal standard. That distinction separates suspicion from conviction. A person can be suspected. A person can be accused. But a criminal conviction requires evidence strong enough to remove reasonable doubt. This is one of the foundations of justice systems around the world. It exists because the consequences of criminal punishment are severe. The same system designed to protect victims must also ensure fairness for the accused. That balance can be difficult, especially in emotionally devastating cases. Cases involving children create particularly intense public reactions. People naturally want accountability. They want the person responsible to face consequences. They want the victim's life to matter. But justice must move carefully. A courtroom cannot operate on anger or grief alone. It must operate on evidence. As the Motueka proceedings continued, another unusual aspect of the case became increasingly clear. The public record remained limited. Many questions that usually emerge during criminal proceedings remained unanswered. The exact events inside the home were not widely known. The specific evidence against the accused woman was not fully public. The relationship between the accused and the infant was not clearly revealed. The details surrounding the adult woman's injuries remained largely private. For those following the case, this created a sense of distance. The case was happening. The justice system was moving. But much of the story remained hidden. This is uncommon in high-profile cases, where every hearing can bring new revelations. Instead, the Motueka investigation remained surrounded by restrictions. Those restrictions served important purposes. They protected privacy. They preserved fairness. They prevented potentially damaging information from influencing proceedings. But they also meant that many people never received the complete explanation they were seeking. In some cases, the truth emerges slowly. Evidence is presented. Witnesses testify. Documents become public. A complete narrative forms. In other cases, much of the truth remains confined within the legal system. The Motueka case appeared to follow the second path. The available information suggested a serious investigation had taken place. The arrest suggested investigators believed they had enough evidence to proceed. The charge suggested they believed the death involved criminal responsibility. But the public never received a complete reconstruction of events. That absence left a lasting sense of uncertainty. The mental health assessment became another major part of the discussion surrounding the case. When such assessments occur, they can affect the direction of legal proceedings. They may influence whether a trial can proceed. They may affect how a case is handled. They may determine whether questions of criminal responsibility need to be examined differently. But again, the public was not given enough information to fully understand the situation. Speculation filled the space where facts were missing. Some wondered whether the accused woman had experienced a severe psychological crisis. Others questioned what investigators had discovered during their examination of the events. But without official details, those questions remained unanswered. And unanswered questions can become part of a case's legacy. Years after headlines fade, people often remember not only what they know. They remember what they never learned. The Motueka case became defined by those unknowns. A child died. A woman was charged. A court process began. But the complete story remained obscured. For those directly affected, however, the impact was not abstract. The death of the infant represented a permanent loss. No legal outcome could restore the future that disappeared. No courtroom decision could bring back birthdays that would never happen. No sentence could undo the grief carried by those who loved him. Justice systems can determine responsibility. They can impose consequences. They can acknowledge wrongdoing. But they cannot reverse time. That is the painful reality behind many homicide cases. The legal process may eventually conclude. A verdict may be reached. A sentence may be delivered. Yet the emotional consequences continue long afterward. For the Motueka community, the case left a permanent mark. A quiet town had experienced a tragedy that challenged its sense of safety. A home had become associated with a heartbreaking event. A child had become the center of a story no community wants to tell. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the case entered a complicated space between justice and uncertainty. Investigators had completed one mission. They had followed evidence. They had identified a person they believed responsible. They had brought the matter before the courts. But the public journey was different. For many people watching from outside, the search for understanding continued. They wanted to know how such a tragedy could occur. They wanted to know what happened behind the closed doors of that home. They wanted to know why a 5-month-old child became the victim of a homicide investigation. Those answers remained largely beyond reach. And that became one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. Because justice is not always the same as closure. A court can determine legal responsibility. But closure is something far more personal. It belongs to families. To communities. To those who carry memories after the headlines disappear. The Motueka case never became a story with every piece neatly revealed. Instead, it remained a case shaped by fragments. A tragedy. An investigation. An arrest. A courtroom. A series of unanswered questions. And at the center of everything, a child whose life ended far too soon. As time passed, public attention gradually moved elsewhere. News cycles changed. Other stories emerged. But the shadow of the case remained. Because some tragedies are not remembered because every detail is known. They are remembered because some questions never stop being asked. And the final chapter of the Motueka murder investigation would not simply be about what happened in court. It would be about what remained afterward. The grief. The silence. The unanswered questions. And the lasting impact of a 5-month-old child whose story ended before it had the chance to truly begin. Every true crime story eventually reaches a point where the investigation ends, the headlines disappear, and the world outside moves forward. But for the people who remain connected to the tragedy, the story does not simply end. There are no closing credits in real life. There is no moment when grief disappears because a case file is closed. There is only what remains. Memories. Questions. The quiet moments when people return to the events that changed everything. The Motueka murder investigation began on an ordinary summer evening. A night that, for most people in the town, was supposed to be like any other. Families were together. Homes were filled with everyday routines. The streets were quiet. The world continued moving. And then, inside a home on Memorial Drive, something happened that would permanently alter the lives of everyone connected to it. A 5-month-old child died. Those words remain the central truth of the entire case. Before the investigation. Before the arrest. Before the legal proceedings. Before every question and every unanswered detail. There was a child. A life that existed for only a brief time. A life measured not in decades, achievements, or memories collected over years, but in moments. The tragedy of losing an infant is different from many other forms of loss because the future disappears at the same moment as the present. There is no long history to look back upon. No collection of childhood stories. No teenage memories. No adult accomplishments. Instead, there is an overwhelming sense of possibility interrupted. A person who had only just begun experiencing the world was suddenly gone. For the family, that loss would have been impossible to fully explain. No investigation could restore what was taken. No legal outcome could return the child to their arms. No answer, no matter how complete, could undo the reality of that night. That is one of the hardest truths in cases involving children. Justice and healing are not the same thing. A justice system can search for responsibility. It can examine evidence. It can determine whether someone should be held accountable. But it cannot reverse time. It cannot rewrite the final moments of a life. It cannot create the future that was lost. The community of Motueka experienced that reality in a deeply personal way. Small towns often carry tragedies differently from larger cities. In a major city, thousands of people may read about a case and then continue with their own lives. In a smaller community, a tragedy becomes part of the shared memory of the place itself. People remember where they were when they heard the news. They remember the conversations. They remember the uncertainty. They remember the feeling that something unimaginable had happened nearby. A place known for natural beauty and peaceful surroundings became connected to a story involving grief, investigation, and unanswered questions. The landscape did not change. The mountains remained. The coastline remained. The streets remained. But for many people, the emotional meaning of the place changed. Because locations absorb memories. A house can become more than a house. A street can become more than a street. A date on a calendar can become something impossible to forget. February 10, 2019 became one of those dates. The investigation that followed revealed only pieces of the larger story. Authorities confirmed the death of the infant. Authorities confirmed the serious injuries suffered by an adult woman. Authorities confirmed that a homicide investigation was launched. Authorities confirmed that a woman was later arrested and charged with murder. But many details remained protected from public view. The public never received a complete explanation of the circumstances surrounding the child's death. The precise sequence of events inside the residence remained unknown. The full evidence considered by investigators was never completely revealed. The outcome of the legal process remained difficult for many outside observers to follow. And because of those missing pieces, the case stayed surrounded by uncertainty. Some stories are remembered because they are completely understood. Others are remembered because they are not. The Motueka case belongs to the second category. It became a story of absence. The absence of a child's future. The absence of public answers. The absence of a complete narrative. Yet even when information is limited, there is an important responsibility in telling such stories. A victim should never become only a detail in a criminal investigation. A person should never be reduced to the circumstances of their death. The 5-month-old child at the center of this case was not a headline. Not a piece of evidence. Not a name connected to a court proceeding. He was a human life. Brief, but real. He mattered before the tragedy happened. He mattered after it happened. And the fact that his story is mostly unknown to the public does not make it less meaningful. In many true crime cases, audiences become focused on the search for the offender. They want to understand motives. They want to analyze behavior. They want to know what could drive someone to commit an act of violence. Those questions are natural. Understanding crime is part of understanding human behavior. But sometimes the most important question is not why someone committed an act. Sometimes the most important question is who was affected. Who lost something that can never be replaced? Who carried the consequences after the investigation ended? Who had to wake up every morning knowing that life would never return to the way it was before? Those questions lead back to the victim. And they lead back to the people left behind. The adult woman injured during the incident also remains a figure surrounded by limited public information. The public knows only fragments. She was found seriously injured. She was transported for medical care. Her role in the events was part of the investigation. Beyond that, much remains unknown. That uncertainty is another reminder that real cases are often more complicated than the stories told through headlines. Behind every name mentioned in an investigation are human beings with histories, relationships, struggles, and experiences that may never become public. The justice process attempts to separate facts from assumptions. It attempts to examine what can be proven. That process can feel incomplete to those watching from outside. But protecting fairness and privacy is also part of justice. The Motueka case demonstrates the tension that exists between public interest and private pain. People want to know what happened. Communities want answers. Families deserve respect. Courts must balance both. And sometimes the result is a story where many questions remain unanswered. Years may pass. People may continue wondering. They may continue searching for explanations. But some questions may never receive public answers. That possibility can be difficult to accept. Humans naturally seek complete stories. We want beginnings, middles, and endings. We want every mystery solved. But real life does not always provide that. Sometimes events happen that leave behind fragments. Sometimes truth exists, but only a few people are allowed to know all of it. Sometimes the most honest conclusion is simply acknowledging what is known and what remains hidden. What is known is that a 5-month-old child died. What is known is that investigators treated the death as a homicide. What is known is that a woman was charged. What is known is that a community was left grieving. What remains unknown is much of the story between those facts. And perhaps that is why the case continues to remain haunting. Not because it is filled with endless mystery, but because at its center is something painfully simple. A child should have had more time, more mornings, more discoveries, more opportunities to experience the world. A life that should have continued was interrupted. The purpose of remembering cases like this is not to create fascination around tragedy. It is to recognize the human cost behind every investigation. To remember that every victim represents something irreplaceable. To understand that behind every police report is a real person. Behind every courtroom proceeding is a real loss. Behind every unanswered question is a family and a community trying to continue. The Motueka murder investigation will remain part of the town's history. Not because of the details that were released, but because of the impact left behind. A quiet evening became a moment that changed lives forever. A home became a crime scene. A community became a place searching for answers. And a 5-month-old child became the center of a story that reminded everyone of the fragility of life. In the end, perhaps the most important thing to remember is not the mystery. Not the investigation. Not even the legal process. It is the life that existed before all of that. A child who was here. A child who mattered. A child whose story, though tragically short, deserves to be remembered with compassion and dignity. Because every life has meaning. Even the smallest. Even the briefest. Even a life that lasted only 5 months. The passage of time does something strange to every tragedy. At first, everything feels immediate. The names. The dates. The locations. The unanswered questions. They remain sharp, impossible to ignore. People talk about what happened. They search for information. They look for explanations. They replay the known details again and again, hoping that somewhere inside the fragments there is a missing piece that will finally make everything understandable. But as years pass, the noise surrounding a case slowly fades. News reports disappear from front pages. Public conversations move toward other events. The investigation becomes another file stored away. The world continues. Yet for those closest to the tragedy, time does not erase what happened. It changes the way the pain is carried. The Motueka case is a reminder that some stories do not end when the investigation ends. They continue quietly in the lives of the people left behind. The death of a child is not simply a moment in history. It becomes a dividing line. Life before. Life after. For a family, there is often a constant awareness of the future that never arrived. There are milestones that never happen. Celebrations that never take place. Photographs that will never be taken. Memories that will never be created. The tragedy is not only the loss of a life. It is the loss of every possible version of that life. A 5-month-old child represents the beginning of a story. The pages have barely been written. The future is still completely unknown. That is what makes such a loss difficult to process. People are not only grieving who the child was. They are grieving who the child could have become. The person he might have been. The voice he might have developed. The interests he might have discovered. The relationships he might have formed. Every possibility disappears at once. And no courtroom can restore those possibilities. No investigation can rebuild the future. No explanation can make the loss acceptable. This is the reality that remains after the detectives leave. After the lawyers finish their arguments. After the public stops watching. The human consequences continue. The Motueka investigation also highlights another uncomfortable truth about criminal cases. The public often wants complete stories. We want clear answers. We want every action explained. We want every motive revealed. We want to understand why something happened. Because understanding creates the feeling that the world is predictable. If we know why something happened, perhaps we can believe it will not happen again. But some cases do not provide that comfort. Some questions remain unanswered. Some details remain private. Some truths belong only to those directly involved. The lack of information surrounding parts of this case created a sense of uncertainty that remained long after the initial investigation. People knew the outcome of certain events. They knew a child had died. They knew authorities had investigated. They knew a woman had faced a murder allegation. But the complete human story behind those facts remained incomplete. And incomplete stories are difficult because the mind naturally tries to finish them. People imagine possibilities. They search for patterns. They create explanations. But imagination is not evidence. A responsible understanding of tragedy requires accepting the difference between what is known and what is unknown. That distinction is especially important in cases involving mental health. When psychological issues become part of a criminal investigation, conversations can quickly become complicated. People may search for a simple explanation. They may want one factor that explains everything. But human behavior is rarely that simple. A person's actions are shaped by countless influences. Their experiences. Their circumstances. Their choices. Their environment. Their state of mind. No single detail can always explain a devastating event. The court's involvement in such matters exists because these questions are complex. The justice system must examine facts carefully. It must protect the rights of everyone involved while also recognizing the harm experienced by victims and families. That balance is not easy. It rarely feels completely satisfying to everyone. For those seeking answers, legal processes can sometimes feel slow or incomplete. For those involved directly, they can feel overwhelming and painful. But the purpose remains the same: to search for truth through evidence, to separate fact from assumption, to determine responsibility fairly. The Motueka case will likely remain remembered not because every detail became known, but because of the profound tragedy at its center. A small child became the focus of a major investigation. A quiet community was forced to confront a devastating event. And many people were left asking questions that may never receive public answers. There is also a lesson in how these stories are told. True crime has the power to inform. It can reveal how investigations work. It can show the dedication of those who search for answers. It can help communities understand difficult events. But it also carries responsibility. The people involved are not characters. They are not simply part of a story. They are real. Their pain is real. Their losses are real. The victim should not disappear behind the mystery. The child should not be remembered only because of the tragedy. He should be remembered because he existed. Because for 5 months, he was part of someone's world. He was someone's child. He was someone whose presence mattered. That is the final reality that remains after everything else is stripped away. Not the headlines. Not the speculation. Not the unanswered questions. A life. A brief life. But still a life. The story of the Motueka murder investigation is ultimately not only about a crime. It is about the fragile boundary between ordinary days and life-changing moments. It is about how quickly everything can change. One evening. One event. One call for emergency assistance. And suddenly, a family, a community, and investigators are drawn into a search for answers. The search may continue in different ways. Some look for legal answers. Some look for emotional understanding. Some simply try to remember. And perhaps remembrance is one of the most important parts of any tragedy. Because when the world moves on, memory becomes a way of acknowledging that someone was here. Someone mattered. Someone's life had meaning. The final chapter of this case is not only about what happened on that night. It is also about what remains afterward. The silence after the investigation. The questions after the headlines. The grief after the emergency lights disappear. And the enduring reminder that every victim has a story that began before the tragedy. A story that deserved more time. More moments. More life. Even when that story was only 5 months long.